To which extent is there a beauty bias in content creation? So we have two sides to this. The first side is the creation side. In the creation side, what we do have is, I think, a reasonable assumption that if a person looks at him or herself on screen and records herself on screen repeatedly and has to, maybe because it's their job, then it would make sense that this person is incentivized by him or herself appearing to himself more attractive on screen than less attractive. So if there is a scale of attractiveness and we assume just the perception of the own person of themselves is higher, then I think it would be reasonable to assume that they are more likely to record themselves. Of course, there are thresholds to this. There are different parts to this. For example, you could say that if a person is, let's say in a given week, has a day where they look very bad, for example, has pimples all over their face, which can happen, or has very bad acne, which is, of course, something that is temporary for most people usually, but it also can be seen as something that it is not accepted in the general society, you could say, as a standard for how you should look. So now I think we can conclude, or it would be reasonable to conclude, that if we assume that a given person assumes that he or she is more attractive, that they are more likely to record themselves, therefore they are more likely to upload themselves, therefore they are more likely to potentially achieve success. Of course, the function of creation success is a function that has many different variables, but if we just want to focus on this variable, beauty bias, basically, and separate out the creation process, then I think this would be a reasonable assumption to assume all the things we just assumed. Then we have the second side. And on the second side, of course, we have the algorithms kick in. So there are, of course, now the distribution side, and the beauty bias of the distribution side is, again, I think has to again be separated into many different variables or parameters. So of course we have the beauty bias of the people who are watching the content. And the people who are watching the content, now let's just assume a given person, for example, talks about health. Of course, health is not the one topic everybody talks about, but let's just assume a person talks about how to get lean, how to get shredded, how to lose weight, and this person is overweight themselves. Of course, now this can depend, because if a person is still overweight but already has lost, 50 kilograms, then of course there would be a reasonable assumption built into the viewer's perception that this person already has some credibility. So of course it depends, but the leaner, for example, a person is, or the better a person looks, the more, in this case of optimizing health, maybe for the sub goal or sub objective of optimizing your physical body, which then also correlates with a better physical appearance, then I think it would be reasonable to assume that the better the physical representation of the body of this person is, the more credible this person appears. So therefore, the watching habits of the consumers are to a certain extent determining what is watched. And now if we again have a feedback loop with the creation side, of course, the people, the creators who get watched more are incentivized to make more content because they can actually then earn more money with it. Therefore, replace other activities in terms of the concept of opportunity cost with creating content and distributing content. So therefore, I think the audience side is now a little bit covered, at least. Then, of course, we have the algorithm and the algorithms on the different platforms. And what we have to see, I think, is that the algorithms are actually just a representation, again, of a function that accounts for different parameters. And one of these parameters is obviously the audience. And of course, these two are not the same, because the algorithm also doesn't want you to swear, for example. Of course, maybe most people also don't want you to swear, but I don't think that it would be useful to assume that both of these translate into each other one-to-one. So therefore, I think the next step is to take a look at the incentives the companies actually have that usually do the distribution for the creators, often for free. If we have a free distribution service like Facebook video, like YouTube, like Instagram, either for video, audio, blogging, and so on, then I think it would be again reasonable to assume that there are, of course, also other incentives, mainly financial incentives. Because if you host for free, if you distribute for free, if you have, I don't know how many servers Google, for example, has all over the world. I just Googled this question and the first thing that came back was 15 gigabytes, which is true if you're searching for Google Drive and the free space for Google Drive, but actually there is another answer from 2014, and it says Google's current data storage capacity is above 20 exabytes of data. 1 exabyte is 1 million terabytes. I think this is a number of the past. Nevertheless, all these servers have to be paid. All these developments of Google, for example, have to be paid. It's a full-on service, and it is paid by people who want to advertise on these services. So now the question is, to whom the algorithm actually wants to appeal? Is it the consumers? Yes, partially, but also it is, I think, people who want to advertise on these products. Now, YouTube, for example, introduced a few years back a huge cut in advertisement revenue for creators, which was to create basically more advertiser-friendly guidelines and therefore to cut out ads from, or to cut out the monetization of many people's videos that were not, in order to simplify it, family-friendly. So now the question is, to which extent factors like these, and obviously this is the main driving factor because it's the main thing that brings in revenue, to which extent factors like these also influence the whole distribution process and how, again, this plays into the beauty bias. Now, a third point is obviously still within the people. So we have the algorithm, and the algorithm, I think, is a good representation of already all the different factors, including the company's interests, the company that is actually behind this. And then we have the actual people that watch the content, but the actual people who watch the content also are operating on many psychological biases. And one of these is the halo effect. The halo effect, not specifically, or not in general, but more specifically in terms of the beauty bias again. To cite Wikipedia, the world's actually biggest dictionary, you could say, the halo effect is the tendency for positive impressions of a person, company, brand, or product in one area to positively influence one's opinion or feelings in other areas. Now, if this one positive tendency or impression of a person is that they are more attractive than average, then I would think that it is reasonable to assume that we can apply the halo effect and therefore assume that if a person is more attractive, then other people's perception is changed in a way that they think this person at the same time is also smarter than compared otherwise, is more intelligent than compared otherwise, is more graceful, thankful, any word basically that has a positive connotation than compared otherwise. Now citing a study by Sheen and Talamas by Kenneth I. Maver and David I. Parrott. So the study is called Blinded by Beauty, Attractiveness Bias and Accurate Perceptions of Academic Performance. This just took a look at academic performance. So now in the abstract, what we read is this. And but a small heads up, this will be a little bit of a longer sentence and I will repeat the sentences or the parts of the sentence that actually are more important than the others. We investigated the limiting effects of the attractiveness halo on perceptions of actual academic performance in phases of 100 university students. This is a rather small sample size actually, but nevertheless, let's continue. Given the ambiguity in various perspectives on the definition of intelligence and the growing consensus on the importance of conscientiousness over intelligence in producing actual academic performance, so to my understanding, basically to which extent intelligence it actually is, that is a predictor of success, academic success at least, and to which extent conscientiousness is. In predicting actual academic performance, we also investigated whether perceived conscientiousness was a more accurate predictor of academic performance than perceived intelligence. Perceived conscientiousness was found to be a better predictor of actual academic performance when compared to perceived intelligence. And perceived academic performance and accuracy was improved when controlling for the influence of attractiveness on judgments. This means, first of all, perceived conscientiousness, again, probably in a system, at least until now, that is largely based on people physically appearing somehow in one way or another, and not just completely independent from us as a society. So we could also say in the future maybe there is something like knowledge, and there is something like organic intelligences, humans, or other organic intelligences, or maybe also other intelligences in general. But the fact of the matter is that currently we have an intermediary in between, and this intermediary is usually someone who teaches. And then these people, of course, operate on the biases that are specific to at least their race, not their race, but the race in terms of them being human or not. Now, so I just misused the word. What I actually wanted to say is the species. I was not trying to refer to the word race, which usually refers to the differences in humans, basically, within the species. And then I just thought, if I cut this out, then of course this will not have this in there, which probably would make this video a lot less controversial. Just mentioning the word these days is probably a little much. Now again, back to the study. Perceived conscientiousness was found to be a better predictor of actual academic performance when compared to perceived intelligence. So now, perceived conscientiousness seems to be higher in value, at least higher in value, in this specific scenario than perceived intelligence. And now also what this means is the second factor. If you control for the influence of attractiveness on judgments, then you achieve a higher accuracy. And this means that to a certain extent, attractiveness, at least in this regard, plays a role. Of course, there are many other studies there are many other studies on this subject summarizing. If you type in beauty bias in Wikipedia, two things turn up. The first one is physical attractiveness stereotype, and the second, again, is the halo effect I already mentioned. The physical attractiveness stereotype is a tendency to assume that people who are physically attractive also possess other desirable personality traits. Stereotyping is the process by which people draw inferences, which are predictions about others based on knowledge of the categories to which they belong. Physical attractiveness can have a significant effect on how people are judged in terms of employment or social opportunities, friendships, sexual behavior, and marriage. In many cases, humans attribute positive characteristics such as intelligence and honesty to attractive people without consciously realizing it. Now, the whole problem as a society, or at least some part of the problem, is obviously the fact that we can only control physical attractiveness of ourselves to a certain extent, which makes it kind of an unfair thing, and therefore a thing to maybe discuss and also potentially to adjust for. To conclude, there are these three different steps we have to take. The first one is the creation step, the second one is the algorithm, and the third one is, we actually had four, I think, in total. No, I divided the actual distribution into multiple ones. So on the one side we have the creation process, which is maybe slightly biased, and also therefore selecting already for the people who at least think of themselves as more attractive. Or at least the physical attractiveness is not something that prevents them from recording videos, from creating content. And on the other side we have the distribution process, which again I subdivided into the categories: algorithm, then the consuming habits, and the consuming habits are obviously also, partially at least, influenced by other effects that operate on a more general basis, but not are. Basically, that are more general psychological biases and concepts that also apply, of course, for somebody who watches content. Now, of course, there are also other forms of content, but there are also other forms of... I frankly cannot continue the sentence without interrupting the whole process, so therefore I just discontinued the sentence. Or in other words, I lost my train of thought. What I was trying to say is that there are general concepts, psychological concepts, like the physical attractiveness stereotype, that also, again, determine or influence the consumer side, but also the algorithm side, because the algorithm side obviously also includes the consumer side. So now, in total, I think it would be a reasonable assumption to assume that out of all the people who want to create, there is a subset of people that are more likely to create due to perceived higher attractiveness. Then there is a subset of these people, who then get incentivized by the algorithm to create more because people think that these people just have more value. Not more value, but the content actually has more value. Whether this is due to higher perceived physical attractiveness, or whether this is due to actually the content actually being better without controlling for physical attractiveness, or actually controlling for physical attractiveness. This way is the better way round, I think. Then we again only have a subset of these people who are creating and also have a kind of a positive feedback, and therefore also are again incentivized in a never-ending feedback loop by the algorithm and by the consumers, and by also the consumers' watching habits, which of course are influenced by general human psychology. In total, the assumption that beauty bias influences which people actually can make creation a successful career, or content creation a successful career, I think, not that I think, but I think it would be reasonable to assume that this is just a subset of all of these people and largely influenced by the beauty bias.